you everyone for joining us for this chat. My name is Prem Kumar. I'm CEO and co-founder at Humanly.io. I'm joined by Anthony Rotoli, CEO of InterviewAI. Thanks for joining us, Anthony.
Yeah, excited to be here with you today, Prem.
Awesome. Well, I know we've had a lot of discussions about many of the topics that have come up as it relates to recruiting in AI, interviewing, screening, scheduling of job candidates. One of the things I wanted to start by diving into is candidate experience. We are unfortunately in a situation where, particularly for high volume roles, there's a lot of unfortunate candidate experiences. So not hearing back, not knowing what next steps are, being ghosted. Sometimes the same applies on the other side of the house as well. But curious to hear a little bit more about how you think about candidate experience. So maybe in your roles as a TA leader or even currently, how you think about that experience and how tools and technology can maybe help or even in some cases hurt.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like all good talent people have have a commitment to candidate experience, right? It's often one of the things that we want to get right. But I found so often, both like in recruiting myself and in leading recruiting teams, it was one of the things we wanted to get right. But there's a lot to get right in recruiting department or in a recruiting function. You want to make sure you have a great process. You want to make sure that you're rigorous in your analysis of candidates. And there's a lot going on, and all of this means that the desire to get candidate experience right, like so many things, right? The path to hell is paved in good intentions. I often felt that way about candidate experience, both myself and in building teams. That like we had all these we always wanted to provide a great candidate experience, but things kind of fall through the cracks when you have a lot going on. And I think it's interesting to watch like the rise of AI, impact what we do in so many different ways, but one that I think is kind of undeniable is it just gives like human beings more scale than they've had before, more ability to scale their own unique touch or unique approach. So I think candidate experience is often you think about a lot of different ways. You could build a whole strategy around it, but oftentimes like there's just a few things that are really important to candidates that really stand out. It's setting proper expectations. It's being timely and communicative. And I think when we think about like a big, great candidate experience, sometimes we think like it'd be great if we used to even do these like blue sky sessions about like how can our candidate experience get better? Imagine anything. Like we send a private jet to someone's house and then fly them in. The CEO meets them at the airport, or whatever it is. Like we can think about these robust experiences, but actually solve for most people if you just set expectations well and you're timely and in your communication. You treat them like, treat them kindly, and you care for their needs. And I do think that we're seeing it in a time where tech does allow us to do that at a much greater scale. We can kind of set our desires a bit more clearly, and then carry those out and touch more people and make sure that they're getting that type of that type of experience, even if you're trying to do that for a lot of people. And that's where I think candidate experience is broken apart in the past. We have these great intentions. As soon as you add real numbers on top of your great intentions, it all kind of falls apart. So yeah, I'm just excited about this place that we're at now, where tech is allowing us to scale our ability further, scale our touch further, and be able to provide great experience for more people is what I'm excited about right now.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point around being able to scale the touch, because sometimes it doesn't take more than a few touches and proper expectation setting. I think candidates also want to know, even if they didn't get the job or aren't moving in the process, out of respect for their time, just knowing that is useful. And I do think technology helps us scale where, I think if hiring teams had unlimited time, money, and resources, they'd have a conversation with every single candidate that applies. And tech can help make that possible. And I think too, another thing on my side is the candidate experience isn't just about that particular open rec and their application and the process for that, but how do you keep in touch with them after that and build a relationship between yourself and the candidate long term. How do you normally go about measuring candidate experience? Have you done surveys? What's worked for you?
It definitely, I think candidate surveys can be a really important part of the process, like getting that qualitative feedback. But I think there's also like quantitative measures as well, right? Like there's one thing in hearing from individuals and what their experience, so that's very important. And I think we learn some really interesting things from that. But I think also just like having a firm grip on, all of your funnel metrics and understanding like how long people are spending before getting a response, as an example. I think it's a great thing, like being able to keep track of in your ATS or outside of it, like really how long is it before we respond to people on average. It was interesting. There was a job platform that I think was had a lot of popularity in the last couple of years that they did this thing where you post your job there and then they would show you like how long the average candidate waits to get a response. And I feel I'm not sure if they did away with that feature, but I don't think it worked out well in most cases, right? It was very rarely like 3 days or even a week or two. Like it was often more than this amount of time. But I do think like that's a funny candidate facing thing and use it a different way. But I think like at the end of the day, like that's one pretty interesting simple measure. I think along with like measuring that, trying to on the front end, like whatever you can match the measurement with clear expectations internally. Like I in a couple of different environments, we've created kind of like candidate commitments. And I think in one case, we even decided to like publicize those for candidates, like, as part of the job description, like this is what we commit to you. This is the amount of time you could expect to hear back at each stage. But I think writing those internally and having everybody on the same page there. And then, you got to be careful not to be, just kind of measuring every single activity the recruiter's doing. Nobody really wants to live in that world. But I think all up being cognizant of our response times and full throughput time in the interview process, those are really good metrics to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that as far as the time and being able to objectively measure it and combining that behavioral data with attitudinal data, not just the qualitative. Yeah, one of the things like companies in our space too is just making it so that at least at the top of the funnel you have some level of chat experience or engagement with the company, with the candidate. Curious as it relates to candidates. I know at Interview AI you work kind of on both sides of the fence there. What should candidates think of when they think of Interview AI?
Yeah, well, yeah, as you mentioned, we serve candidates and we serve companies. We want our mission is kind of to make everybody better at interviewing, whoever you are. If you're involved in interviews, we want things to be better for you. And I think for candidates, what they can know about us is like that's kind of the mission that we're going to be on, is to make things better for them every step of the way. Today, we help make it a bit better by just helping them prepare for interviews. Come in and tell us any job you're interviewing for, tell us a bit more about the role, add a job description or your resume, and we'll give you some insight into the questions they may get, let you practice this question, give you some feedback on how that goes when you go through and prepare for those interviews. In the future, we want to keep challenging ourselves. We got some things that I think are pretty exciting on our roadmap. But we want to keep challenging ourselves to think about anything we build is just making the interview better for candidates. I think we want to, we're pretty committed to building sensible solutions, that make sense to augment individuals and not replace, what people should be doing and the ways that they should be showing up in interviews. So I think, yeah, we'll continue to be a friend to the candidate and think about how to make their interviewing experience better with interesting applications of tech and AI, without interfering at all with what an interview should do, which is allow a company to measure ability. We still want that to be like kind of front and center, of course, in an interview, but we'd love to take away a bit more anxiety from candidates by providing them tools that can really set them up for success, allow them to demonstrate those abilities, because oftentimes there are so many other aspects of an interview that kind of mask that or make it really tough to paint the full picture of what somebody's capable of, because interview environments are artificial.
Yep. No, it's definitely a really interesting problem space. I think, if you survey most hiring folks doing hiring or leaders, they generally would feel that they're good at interviewing, but that's not measured, and nor do I think there's enough prep done, standardization done. Just getting back to the candidate experience side too, you'd mentioned like being stressed or some anxiety in the experience. What we find is just by like getting everyone into a conversation, even if it's done by chatbot pre-interview, and get questions answered. We can reduce some of that. So it's definitely interesting. And yeah, and you know, some companies have quantified it. I think it was Virgin Media that loses $6 million a year because candidates that don't have a good experience will switch and not be a customer anymore. So particularly in B2C and in many industries, your candidates can be your best customers. So lots of reasons to get it right.
Great.
The next topic is more around decision making in HR and in recruiting tech, even in interview with AI. So I guess I'd be curious to hear from you how you think we can use tools and technology. One to be better interviewers, which you alluded to a little bit with what you're doing, and feel free to expand on that as well. But also, how do we make better hiring decisions using technology and data?
Yeah. Well, I think that in general, I'm really interested about decision making in the HR space and how this new tech will kind of help us along, or data in general can help us along through kind of use of AI. But I think when it comes to decision making pertaining to hiring, the more standardization I think we could see in the space, the better. Something like obviously we kind of first thing we care about InterviewAI is like giving people better interview questions. That was just like our first like simple thing that we were like, yeah, I just having been in the position previously to help coach folks up to get ready to do interviews, it was amazing the number of leaders I ran into that kind of had their heads wrapped around hiring and didn't really know like what should I say when I go to this interview, like what should I really ask. So that was one step that was interesting to us. And beyond that was like, which we actually thought was the even further like more important, is not the question as much as like how do you assess the answer. So forgetting about us for a moment, I just think in general we find in a lot of hiring processes is it's astounding, even at large established companies, some that, I'm sure you and I both have this experience, how sometimes it's how little, I don't want to say rigor, but how little standardization or substance is provided around the interview process. Is surprised even as a recruiter to go in some large established companies and realize, whoa, we're mostly just throwing people in a room and say, hey, go talk to them. You know how to do this job. Go figure out if they know how to do the job.
Yeah.
And really kind of underestimating how difficult that is. So I just think the more that we could standardize and make sure that, along the way, all candidates are getting a pretty similar experience as we're going through and interviewing them. And then our methods and our rubrics for assessing what happened in the interview are consistent and we're sticking to them. That type of rigor is super important. It's also a funny thing in recruiting, the rubber hits the road. I think the recruiting process for a lot of folks, particularly hiring managers, is like, I'm understaffed. I need more help. I need the headcount so badly. I have to go through several steps to like beg for the headcount. I am chomping at the bit by the time that headcount actually gets approved. And I'm like off to the races. Like before I even have a job description ready, I'm talking to some people out there. And then like maybe I hack together a job description. Recruiter kind of helps me get that posted. Like we're oftentimes when it comes to hiring, we're so eager to get the extra help. We're putting the cart before the horse, if you will. It's a really easy thing to do. I know I've fallen into it myself, certainly when hiring for my own businesses. So I think like that's kind of the interview process is plagued with that. People are eager to get more help and want to get through that as quickly as possible, get the help that they need. So I think as talent professionals, it's even more important to go in with structure. Have the rigor there and have it ready in a way that's not going to slow down your hiring partners. And then beyond that, right? So like being ahead of the speed that they'll want, and making sure that we're really just being as objective and consistent as possible is how the best hiring decisions get made. When I think about tech assisting us, what I'm really intrigued about, but I haven't seen so much of just yet, is tech being there alongside us as interviews are happening to collect more data than humans are able to collect themselves. I'm pretty intrigued by that. Like I think that we can only learn so much, and we're again in this artificial environment. There's a huge power imbalance in interviewing, right? And it's tough to even kind of think about having a conversation with one individual that knows so much about the topic and another individual that's tried to learn as much as they can with the information that's available, but often knows far less. Like getting those people in a room together and having one judge the other, it's again, I think it's pretty tough to get all the right signal from that. So I'll be intrigued to watch how tech can step in more and more and capture more of what's happening in that room. I know that's been intriguing to you, I think, to an extent in the past as well.
Yeah, for sure. And especially with a lot of interviews happening remotely over Zoom and Teams and tools like that, I think a lot more can be measured, and you can't really change what you're not effectively measuring. But there's a lot that you can measure. Such like one of the data points we were looking at is we analyzed several hundred interviews, and we found that for a single role, and we found that candidates that were in the same city as the interviewer, so they were both in Seattle, ended up getting not just a higher overall score. This wasn't at our company, but this was aggregate data for a particular anonymous customer. I will not name them, but we also found that there was more time spent in small talk at the beginning. If you have some proximity bias, you're nothing wrong with rapport building, but there is an uneven amount of rapport building doled out to folks who you're similar to, which then could have influenced the decision. So it's really interesting stuff. I do think measurement can only help, and having access to more data is good and very helpful. Another question for you, this is a tough one in a sense that I don't know if there's a purely a right answer, but I've heard a lot of hiring team members, recruiters, folks that are doing interviews, bring up the word intuition and having intuition as to whether someone can be good or not. And that's, can be wrought with bias, but does that play a role? How do you think of the use of someone's own intuition and as it relates to making the right hiring decision along with the objective data and the AI side?
Yeah, this is something I actually spend a considerable amount of time thinking about and pondering. And even as I talk about interviewing solutions with other folks from an array of backgrounds who I respect professionally, when you pose the idea of even like really standardized objective interviews and like guiding interviewers more, there's certainly some folks you'll run into that will have a reaction that either is like a knee-jerk reaction, like I know good when I see it, right? We kind of like can categorize some folks as like, they're just not like they believe in their methods. Who knows if they're working? We can measure that. No, yes or no. And then other folks that like realize that it might not be perfect, and maybe they're guessing a bit. And then a bunch of people in the middle. I think that uh, you know I, I like how you preface this question because it's a really tough one to answer. But I do believe this: we owe it to ourselves to do far better in assessing the data that we do have that we can access, right? I think if we did a better job, and we will over time do a better job of bringing all of the data points, all the facts and important information to the table in an interview setting, and using the power of technology to assess that really, really well, at a certain point you do start to question, like, what's the human's role, right? Like, I want to get to the humans, what I think the humans' role in a second. But if we imagine a world in which, like, yeah, like we could do a pretty good job of like taking somebody's background and whatever they have to say and analyzing it really well and matching that to like what's required for the role, and letting technology help us with that, like, then why is that other human in the room? And I believe they still should be in that room, because I think there are things that uh, that are tough for a machine to measure. And I'm going to take your topic of intuition and get into like even more scary territory and talk about, cultural alignment, or, alignment to whatever the environment is. I think a lot of that is pretty loaded and could be used for good or not, but often can open up an area for, people just really, we know how that could go bad. But I do think that where my mind goes when I think about the computers doing a really good job measuring the facts is that we'll need humans to measure, to measure these less, uh, distinct, or these less you know certain things, right? The facts that are certain, right? What isn't on paper, like, still probably has to be somewhat assessed by a human. But it's scary because, like, when we give humans too much room to just leverage that assessment, it could go bad. So I kind of envision a world where human judgment and intuition, or assessment of the candidate aligning to the environment they're coming into, probably still plays a role in our interviews no matter what, but that we try to augment that input with these other things, whether it's like facts that already exist outside of the interview about that individual and about the company, what happens in that interview and how we can measure that in a more objective way. And then all of that gets kind of like, accompanied by an individual's experience, or their thoughts on this person. But I even think that we could guide intuition better. I'm kind of like a believer that behind the words intuition or culture fit or any of that, there is some stuff that's probably useful, right? Like, what is triggering it? If we could better get a grip on, like, what exactly is that? Like, can we figure out more about your intuition, right? Can we dig deeper and deeper and ask more and more questions to, like, assess your intuition? That there's probably some good stuff there. And there's a lot of room if we just chalk it up to, like, okay, so what's your rating? What's your intuition, without defining that at all? Like, hey, we did all this data stuff, and, out of the full picture of this person, the full pie, like, we're letting the data tell 75% of the story. And now you have 25% to chime in and say what you think about this person. And that's how much it's going to impact the decision. Broad, like, so what do you think? Give them a 1 to 4. Like, I don't think that's kind of what we do right now, and I don't think it's great. I think that getting deeper, okay, what is your? It would be great if it was like, what is your 1 to 4? Oh, you're a 2.5. Okay, why with this clarifier? Like, why with this clarifier? Like, let's go down kind of a little bit more detail and figure out what exactly is it that made you 3 or 4. So I don't think raw, unfiltered intuition is very helpful or valuable, and it leaves room for a lot of risk. But I think latching on to why somebody did feel that way and learning more about it, and then even, then taking and keeping some of that and maybe disposing of some of that, is interesting. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of roundabout way
So
that
lot of sense. And I liked what you said about guiding intuition. And in the same way that we demand, when we think about ethical AI, one core tenet is transparency and knowing why the AI is making certain decisions. I think we can demand the same of ourselves, right? Can we be transparent with those who work around us and ourselves to understand what are the things that are causing that produced intuition? Is it an innate kind of bias I have, or is it actual data that I've seen? So I think if we even demand that kind of transparency of our own intuition algorithms, we'll learn a lot more about ourselves, and we'll know how we can kind of fit in tech. So I think that's super interesting. And yeah, I think with AI in general, when I think about like responsible ethical AI, a lot of it is the explainability, the transparency. So it's one thing for a system to suggest a change, but can it explain to me why it's suggesting it? And that kind of goes back to what you're talking about, which is collecting a lot of data, and helping us make the right decision. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit to tools, because I know you're definitely one that experiments with a lot of tools. You've done that at tech companies and beyond, and in your personal life. But how do you, like, when you see all these tools using like forms of generative AI or newer technology, what are you looking for? What questions do you ask? How do you demonstrate value and impact, I guess, as it relates to TA and hiring in general?
Yeah. Well, I think, and I think your question is pretty AI focused, right? Like, I certainly talk about, like, HR tech and how I think about evaluating those solutions, but I'll probably focus kind of on in this new wave of AI and HR tech, like how I think about that. Yeah, no, I'll just kind of speak fluidly on that. So I think first, like, something I look out for in any AI and HR tech is, like, first layer of how responsible I think this company is. And I certainly apply this to, what I'm building as well. And I guess, like, the way I think about responsibility in implementing AI in any space is, how much decision-making authority are you handing over to the AI, and how crucial are those decisions, that you're handing over. So when I think about that in the context of hiring, we'll use ourselves as a bit of an example. Today we propose questions that you might want to ask somebody in an interview, and we give you some indication of what you might want to look out for when somebody's answering those questions. We find this is we believe, hopefully, that this is helpful. It gets people further than they were if they didn't really know how to start to ask questions and start to look out for things in an interview. But what we're really kind of shy about is then saying, hey, as a result of that conversation, here's what you should do, right? Because we just don't trust the AI that much yet. And we're building as responsibly as we can, but we want to have some limit in how much decision making we're shipping out to systems that are still under development. They're still figuring a lot of this out. So I look for that in other products. I love seeing AI coming to all these different HR spaces, but I want to see that folks are bringing generative AI to bear in a way that has we're still fairly limited. I do imagine a world in the future where we will trust these machines to do more decision making for us, but I just kind of first layer, I want to see companies right now that are pretty cautious, and thinking about let's not remove humans from any point where a real decision, a life impacting decision, needs to be made. And I guess that's maybe a bit of a dramatic way to say it, but deciding if somebody gets a job or not, or deciding how their performance is reviewed, or a number of these things, even deciding on let's say AI, seeing AI in all these different HR areas, AI deciding how to determine the outcome of an employee request, or employees in ways that they normally interact with HR, bringing AI in too much to make decisions there it's a bit scary. So I'd say as I'm thinking about tools and I'm seeing new tools in the market right now, I first want to just kind of have that check. If the AI is doing far more than if it's saying we'll do all of this for you, we'll give you the answer on this really important topic by just doing a few things, and the AI does the rest. Really just take time to understand exactly how much of that is being decided with really limited guardrails. So I think I'm most comfortable and most excited right now about companies that are not only demonstrating responsibility, but they're just taking their time and thinking about in the products they're building, how much is just handed off to the AI, and where humans are still making decisions. Okay, beyond that, right? Are they first layer responsible? Are they limiting how much they're allowing this decision making to happen without humans involved? I think the next layer is just digging deeper into how their technology actually works, how data is being shared back and forth. Are companies using off the shelf models, of building their own models, and how are they protecting the data that's going in and out of there? I think obviously all really important to dig into. Again, particularly depending on how how impactful the decisions are that are being made by these platforms. And then I think obviously as you do with any vendor evaluations, just important to understand how much experience the company has, how far along are they in this thing, how much are they just kind of getting up and running, and how much stability could you expect long term. But I do think that for me, it feels right to find companies that are leveraging AI to help, augment the product, but they're still building a whole lot of product that requires real thought and intentionality in how the users interact and all of these things, where AI is showing up in the right times in the right places to augment your work. But I think everything doesn't have to be AI. There's a lot in between where the AI shows up, and understanding that there's a lot of intention and just good design and good building and functionality outside of where the AI shows up is important as well. I think that's really, it's easy to look past that right now. It's interesting how many HR leaders I've heard lately saying things my leadership is just really telling me I need to adopt AI. They want to see me adopt AI. So they're running out okay, how can I throw AI at these things? And the truth is, I think we're much closer to where we were 2 or 3 years ago, and having really interesting HR tech platforms that could, make your business better, that were already kind of leveraging AI, but they're just advancing. Like, I think solving the problem right now, like figuring out a good solution to solve your problem, is far more important than just figuring out if there's AI that that you should be using because somebody told you to use AI in this space.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think if you don't have the people and process figured out, AI can even make bad things happen faster, right? So I think there's huge opportunities, I feel, in time savings and experience and even mitigating bias through the use of AI, but it has to be done right. And you're right, it can't be a solution in search of a problem. You have to start with the problem first. But yeah, it is certainly interesting. And I think to your point around decision making, and that's generally where a lot of the more recent laws are around the AI's role in decision making. And I agree with you in the sense that I want tools to help me with the data and maybe recommendations for me to then make the right decision, but for the human to actually make and effectuate the decision. It's kind of like writing, for example. There's a lot of generative AI use cases in writing emails or writing a job description, or in Humanly's case, writing candidate follow-up emails and outreach. But to me, that's one where it's not like sending it for you too. That's the almost like the decision part of it. Like it's not doing the thing. It's putting the words together in a way that seem to make a lot of sense, but you can change them and add new ones if you want. So yeah, that's at least right now the role I see. Our another kind of question I had. So um well, one thing I was going to ask you. So are you starting to see, so one thing that we will generally, at least in B2B SaaS in our space, at our scale, we would want an audit. We'd want like our tool is audited, for example. How do you feel about AI safety as it relates to like third-party auditing, or how do you know if something's safe? So I know we're saying it's important, it is, but let's say it's not making decisions. How can you still build trust in it?
Yeah. Well, I do think like some of the legislation we've seen, I think particularly it seems like New York is kind of furthest along on this. Like they had some of the earliest legislation on AI in the process of hiring. I think it's pretty good. You should definitely, if you're considering any AI tools, as part of your vendor evaluation, just go educate yourself on the legislation that's been written already on this, because it does lay out to an extent, a bit of a blueprint for what we might see in other states and other localities around leveraging AI here. And I think that as I dug in and learned more about this and understood more about the auditing process, it's kind of interesting because this is so nascent. It seems like if every every company was auditing as heavily as that legislation, like you would suggest people should, like there would be a lot more auditing going on. There'd be a lot more AI auditors out there. But I do think follow like looking at the process is suggested, and then just even speaking, I've learned a lot by just speaking to some of these auditors and understanding what their process looks like. I think that's all really good education. That's pretty easy to do. I think when it comes to auditing, like I'm probably like reluctant to regurgitate the process myself. It's been a little while before I since I dug deeply into like what auditors real processes are, but I know at the very least like validating your results with auditing data. I think aside from that, the level of auditing that's like being done by these auditors, simply doing some of your own evaluation of these tools side by side with like what humans would do is certainly like a rudimentary way to audit the outcomes. I think even the idea of like trying systems or trialing systems and watching the output and then having a human do the same thing at the same time until you're really comfortable with this, and then auditing the decisions made on both sides. I think that's a really like decent rudimentary practice if you can, and at the very least like starts to give you some comfort with where the machine's stepping outside of what a human would do. So I guess what I would say is looking at what's happening in some of these locations that are a bit further along in their legislation, and how they're reacting to it, and kind of the services that are now available to have systems audited, and then doing some of that yourself and not letting the guardrails off your AI until you feel comfortable with how it aligns or doesn't align to the human decisions that we made. I think those are some good initial steps to take.
Yeah, as far as like the testing against the human benchmark, I've seen customers out there that, and it kind of depends on the size of your organization and what change management looks like, but maybe trying it out with a set of roles or one part of your organization as compared to the rest could be one way of doing it. But yeah, no, I think this is all stuff we're all learning. And as you said, there's certainly legislation and some guiding law, but generally speaking, a lot of these you have to ask the right questions because vendors are making a lot of decisions that haven't totally been scoped out yet as to what is the right way of doing things.
We'll just say one more thing on the topic, like similar to the idea of evaluating vendors to solve a problem, not so much just going to find AI vendors. I think similar, like we should continue with the same type of monitoring that we've always done, right? Like the way that we monitor for disparate impact through different stages in the funnel and making sure that there's equal representation as there should be, like as we move through the funnel, right? Some of these, again, just real standard recruiting metrics that you use to make sure that your system is equitable. Should continue with all of that. And we should expect that, like, that just because AI is here, like it doesn't really change how we should be monitoring that to make sure there's health in our recruiting process anyways. And hopefully that will catch some of these things that you might not catch otherwise.
Yeah, and when you talk about kind of making sure you're really solving a problem, you don't hire because no one says, oh, we need people, let's hire them without having an actual role or problem you want them to solve, just like saying, hey, we need AI, let's bring it in. So I think, just like when you're hiring someone, having identified the gap that the solution will fill, what problems it's solving, where it fits into the process. So often, you've heard me say before, but I'll often recommend people write a job description for their AI. Curious, any like misconceptions, and we've alluded to a few of these, but any misconceptions, whether for better or for worse, as it relates to AI right now, that you're seeing out there?
I do. I guess a huge one, but I think the misconception that this is really here to take all of our jobs. I just find the more that I just use AI in my personal life, like so many technical tools that have come our way in our lifetimes, we thought like, oh wow, this has completely changed this world. Something I think about often is I remember way back when I was in school, I took an accounting class at one point, and like in that accounting class, this is long enough ago that like we had these, I don't even know what to call them, but accounting notebooks, right? That you had to write everything down and you had to do the math with a calculator. And when referring to this is like, I thought recently, like, what is this advent of AI and the way it's coming to all these different professions? What is it similar to? And for whatever reason, it struck me like it must have been wild for accountants when spreadsheets came out, right? Like they spent forever doing it that way. When they saw spreadsheets with formulas, they must have been like, oh, there goes my job. But the
Yeah.
truth is, like, there's plenty of accountants and we still need accountants. Like the accountants are more efficient and more accurate now, harder to make a mistake with all the tech that we have, but we still need folks with that knowledge. And I think that like the more that we play with this, the more that we're going to find is like this is a fantastic tool that makes humans much more effective, and that might change like the where we see people in different professions a bit. But I mostly just feel like it's going to empower individuals that are adopters and early adopters. I think there's like this, so that's kind of one thing. Like it's not. I don't think it's going to take all of our jobs. It's going to make you far more effective, and the more you use it, you just can feel a lot of ways. And maybe when I say use it, I often am just thinking of, just ChatGPT, but other tools that we use. Like you just find the gaps. I was using a AI recording tool recently that was, just recording my call, and they give me a really good analysis, as all these AI recording tools do for your calls. It gives you an overview and some notes and things like that. And I am often like amazed by how much it could catch. And there's a recent call I was reviewing where it got all this nuance, and I was able, like, wow, I can't believe it was able to put that together. We didn't even speak those words, and it was able to like intelligently get that. And then I saw at the top of the call, you referred to the client that I was talking to, the company I was talking to, and it referred to the location as I think it said they were in like Venice, Italy, and they were in like, the Northeast of the US. And it's a great example where it's just like this is going to make like some really foolish mistakes. As a young professional, I would say like be really careful with your copy and paste, right? Like, because it just takes one like that it's like, oh, where did this come from? So I guess what I would say is like, again, to the point of like, I think the more you use and play with this stuff, it starts to feel a lot more like, yeah, iPhones are awesome. It was great when the iPhone came out. Like it made us way more practical. Like it doesn't solve all your problems. And I don't think this will. I think one thing that I wouldn't call like a misconception, but I'm curious to keep seeing develop and I'm curious to keep tracking is fear of bias in AI, I think is very legitimate and very real. But I keep wanting to like be able to dig deeper and understand more closely what is the trade-off there. And so when I think about bias in AI in like candidate evaluation, what I can't help but think is how unconsciously biased all of us humans are.
Yeah.
Right? So when we go through and whether it's evaluating resumes or interviewing someone, gosh, there's just so much room, as we already talked about, for humans' intuition or whatever it is to really sway the conversation so much. And if instead I've got to go with the the data set that is imperfect because it's based on human knowledge, like, but that it kind of hopefully applies certain things pretty objectively. And it's interesting to know what the trade-off is. And I think it's way too early to know that. And a lot of this auditing, all of these good practices will help us learn it more and more. But again, I don't know if I'd call that a misconception. But I think where there can be some real fear and like we're handing things off to the system, we think that it's probably like rooted in bias. I have so much curiosity. I just want to know how we can overcome our limitations as human beings. When it comes to all of these things, like when will the machines help us overcome some of those limitations, help us be less biased, without them being more biased or biased in a different way that is more harmful. So yeah, that's just like a question mark. I can't wait to keep tracking that and measuring it closely.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think certainly not doing a whole lot to scrutinize and audit human interviewers. I mean, that's one benefit of technology. You can really get deep in how much you audit it and what it's doing without creating bad cultural overtones or anything like that. But it
Totally.
is,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a good point you make. There is a lot of bias in how we're currently doing things.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for the chat, and hopefully there'll be many more of these.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Good to see you, Prem.